Hi everyone and welcome back. So now that we have understood the demo, let's try to get inside the code and see how things are actually working behind the scenes, right? So let's get started. We'll start with all the functions that are there in our code, and then we'll try to understand each function, how they are functioning, and then we'll try to understand the overall code structure on how things work. So let's start with the first function, which would be our generate agent thinking, right? So let's talk about this function. So what happens, what's the main purpose of this function? So what happens is you are simulating and logging a thinking process for the AI agent while analyzing the query itself, right? Now this is not exactly how an AI agent thinks, but we are trying to simulate things over here, right? Now the key component over here that you will see is the function first takes in a query. After taking in a query, it will analyze the query. It will detect the potential intents by looking at specific keywords that are relevant, right? So for example, over here you will have keywords relevant to weather. Over here you will have keywords relevant to the tasks, and so on, right? And then after that, it will handle multiple or ambiguous intents by prioritizing the most likely one. So it could happen that you might have intent from weather and you might have intent from, say, some task to do, right? Such as remind me to take my raincoat when there's a rainy weather or something like that, right? So that's where you are having multiple intents. You're not just having a single intent. So when there are multiple intents, what this particular agent does after detecting all the potential intents, it looks for specific keywords that are relevant to that particular intents, right? And then it handles the multiple intents by prioritizing the most likely one, right? And then what happens is it will extract the entities. What exactly are these entities? So these entities could actually be something like city names, or if you're describing a task, then it could be a task description, it could be a mathematical expression, anything, right? So it will try to extract these entities, and then what it will do is it will record the reasoning process in a multi-line text, and then it will show it us on the UI about how the agent is thinking, right? And that's happening somewhere over here, right? And then sorry, this is the calculation part, but then it will return the entire thinking process that is done by this generate agent thinking. It will join the entire thinking process, the one that's getting appended in the entire function, right? And then you will have your final, oops, where did I missed something? Okay. And then you will have your final thinking or reasoning logic appended into the thinking, and it would be displayed in the UI, right? So this is how the thinking process of the agent happens inside this particular code, right? Now let's cover the traditional automation method, although we should go for agent approach, but I think since we have traditional automation over here, let's look into it. It should not be an issue. So what happens in a traditional automation is it is simulating a rule-based system which only responds to exact patterns, the same way as we did in our previous code, right? So you will see if, whether in query, if, elif, say show to-do list or whatever, show my to-do list in the query. So there are a bunch of if-else statements. So this is how the RPA would work, right? Where you will have a bunch of if-else statements, and then based on these if-else statements, you're trying to basically get a gist of what exactly the user wants you to do, right? And that's what is happening over here. Now the key limitations of this particular process would be that it will respond only to the exact keywords that are matched, right? So for example, it must contain something like weather over here, right? That's what you're querying for. And it requires a specific command format. You have to remember the commands, right? It cannot handle the variations in the language, or it cannot infer the intent, right? It will provide more generic responses with no contextual awareness, right? And then similarly, it completely fails when an input does not matches any particular pattern that is expected by the query, right? So sort of a rigid structure of a traditional rule-based system, and then it will just return whatever is expected from it, right? Now let's go back to our agentic approach, right? Here we understood how the agent is thinking and analyzing a particular query. Now after analyzing the query, let's try to understand what happens inside the agentic approach itself, or what approach, how exactly is it having this kind of a flexible understanding of what's happening, right? So what agent does it simulates a flexible AI agent that understands the natural language intent itself, right? It will recognize multiple ways to ask for the same information, right? And then it will extract the meaning even from incomplete or conversational sentences. So if you have a look over here, it has a flexible understanding of weather, where inside the query it's trying to look for multiple instances of a particular multiple instances in which a weather could be queried by the user, right? So it does that, and similarly you will see for the to-do list itself over here, and so on. Understanding the words after having a flexible understanding from a corpus of data, what it does, it will extract with a flexible pattern. So for example, if the query contains say city, right, in the weather data keys, then you have something like, hey, what's the weather in New York? So now you will look at the city itself and then provide a contextual awareness response, right, where you have something like the agent would say something like the weather in New York is whatever the weather condition in New York is, right? If you look at the weather data over here, you will see that the New York's weather condition is sunny and the temperature is around 72 Fahrenheit, right? So it will have sort of a lookup. It will try to get a contextual awareness of what exactly is asked, and then it will give you a perfect response out of it, right? You will have a response something like, if the weather is greater than 75 degrees, then the agent might say something like the weather condition in the particular city is perfect for outdoor activities or something like that, right? So you see that it's providing a contextual it is providing a contextual response where it is suggesting you say something like you need an umbrella while it is raining, right? And it is also handling the ambiguity by asking clarifying questions, by using the reasoning and thinking, right? So this adds a helpful information beyond just explicitly requested query pairs, right? And then it also handles a conversational elements like greetings and all that it is doing in something over here, right? I would be happy to check the weather for you for which city are you interested in, and so on, right? So this is how you can this is how the agent is responding in a much better way, and it is processing the information in a much better way than a traditional RPA sort of a system. So that's how it works. And then the final function that we have over here is the process query itself, where what is happening is it coordinates the overall flow between the user input and the system response itself. Now, how it does it? It takes a user query and a selected approach. So if you want to go for a traditional or an agentic AI kind of a system, and for the agent approach, it generates and displays the thinking process. Then it routes the query to either the traditional or the agent process function, and then returns response from both of them of whatever is applicable, right? So the thinking process will only work if the agent is being called, and then if there's just traditional thinking that's or the traditional algorithm that's going on, then it will just directly use the traditional algorithm to generate your responses, right? So now that's how the entire that's the entire structure or the backbone of the demo that we had seen in the previous video. Now, of course, there's one more thing, which is the Gradio block. You don't have to worry about the Gradio. It's more about the UI side of things, on what's happening on the UI side. It will just create a user interface for interacting with your virtual assistant, right? And the key component, of course, would be the text input from the user queries, the radio buttons, which will select your traditional versus your agentic AI approach. So that's somewhere over here, and then you submit your queries, you submit your request basically, right? And then you have just your response areas, and then the clear explanations between the two query types that you have. We have seen this in the previous videos. I won't be going in detail about the Gradio app itself. Yeah, that's how things work. Let's now quickly try to analyze the entire program flow itself, on how the program would be flowing once you launch the app. What will happen is it will initialize your simulated databases that you have over here. The weather database and the to-do list database, and then the user will type a query, select an example, select a model approach which he or she wants, the traditional or the agentic AI, and then it will just they will just submit the request. After submitting the request, it will go to the process query function, which was over here, if I'm not wrong. Yeah. So it will go to the process query function, and what happens in the process query function is it will receive the input and the approach which is selected. Now, if the agent AI is selected, then it will generate the agent thinking, which was over here. right? It will generate the agent thinking. After generating the agent thinking step, it will call the agent approach to generate a flexible and context-aware response, which would be done over here by this function. And then suppose if the user wants a traditional automation, then it calls the traditional automation function, which is over here, and it will try to attempt to match the patterns, and then there would be no thinking process that would between the for the response generation, right? And then once this processing is done, the responses will be displayed. The system will display the appropriate response in the output area, and then for the agent approach, it will also display the thinking process that's happening, and then the thinking process will remain hidden for the traditional approach. So yeah, that's the entire architecture of the code that we have written, and how thinking will happen, how reasoning will happen, and how the agent would work versus a traditional automation system. So that's it for this video. In the next video, we will go through the entire demo itself. We'll try to understand how things are working by looking at the Gradio app, and we'll see what's the difference between an RPA and an agentic AI kind of a system. So I'll see you in the next one. Thank you.